Now, regarding biological race differences, the evidence is overwhelming that humans have divergent evolution, the economic inequality is inevitable between the races, and for a multiracial society to function, everyone must come to tolerate an unprecedented level of economic inequality, not only generally, but between racial groups. And as societies become more multiracial, there must become more tolerance for economic inequality. The only alternative is radical wealth redistribution schemes or opportunity redistribution schemes, which is to say, racial discrimination against Europeans. But instead of understanding the problems and trying to come up with a solution to these problems, we have an entire political movement dedicated to both increasing racial diversity and reducing tolerance for the inevitable inequality that results. And these people call themselves many self-congratulatory names, like a child calling themselves the good guys. They call themselves liberals, progressives, the left, and some even just straight up calling themselves the supporter of good things as opposed to bad things. But the consistency in all of their thinking is anti-white racism and support for the establishment. When your policies are shared by Burger King, by Google, by the entire Democrat Party and half the Republican Party, Vox, which is owned by Comcast, by Nike, even the Pope, maybe it's time to ask yourself, am I the baddie? Am I maybe the bad guy on these things? When the Pope, the papists are on your side, maybe that should be a sign that you're not on the side of truth. I mean, the Catholic Church has a pretty good track record of always being wrong. These people call themselves the left, but they are enemies of the labor movement. One of the ways labor has historically been able to organize is through regional restriction of supply and through tariffs. This forces firms to employ people in a certain country, and even within a certain part of the country sometimes, and they can't just export to other countries willy-nilly, picking and choosing who to hire and who to sell to. If you want to sell something in Hungary, for example, you would have to make a deal with organized Hungarian labor. If you wanted to sell something in Mexico, you had to deal with organized Mexican labor, in all likelihood make it in Mexico. If you wanted to produce something in Mexico, it would have to be cheap enough that Mexicans could afford it, and you had to negotiate living wages with the employees. The point of the factory was for the good of the people in that area. But when you have open borders, you make it impossible for labor to organize. And so labor is deracinated, it's spread apart, everyone's acting individually while the employers and the capitalists are acting collectively, and they just get chewed up and spit out by capitalists. Smaller firms, which don't compete globally, cannot compete. Small firms cannot compete on price with Nike in shoe production, for example, and so all the markets consolidate into those firms which can engage in global labor exploitation most easily, which tend to be larger firms. Now, worker control of means of production isn't some strict rule or binary thing. It falls along a continuum. There are degrees of worker control. I'm a pragmatist. A small business is closer to that ideal than a large firm is. And Latin America is just getting raked over the coals by global capitalism and free trade. So what is Vaush functionally doing? He's supporting the most vulgar form of capitalism. He may say he's anti-capitalist, but in practice, he's pushing a capitalist agenda by supporting the deracination of labors and destroying the ability of labor to organize. If you think that what I'm doing here is some sort of intellectual trickery, well, this is what Bernie Sanders used to believe before he ran for president, before he became co-opted by the Democrat Party establishment. He would say, open borders is a Koch brothers idea.
Up to a level of open borders, about sharply increasing the amount of foreign aid. Open borders.
That's a Koch brothers proposal. The
Really?
idea, of course. I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of the global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that. If you believe in a nation state, or in a country called the United States, or UK, or Denmark, or any other country, you have an obligation, in my view, to do everything we can to help poor people. What right-wing people in this country would love is an open border policy. Bring in all kinds of people who work for $2 or $3 an hour. That would be great for them. I don't believe in that. I think we have to raise wages in this country. I think we have to do everything that we can to create the millions of jobs. You know what youth unemployment in the United States of America today? If you're white, a white kid, high school graduate, 33%, a Hispanic, 36%, African American, 51%. You think we should open the borders and bring in a lot of low-wage workers? Or do you think maybe we should try to get jobs for those kids? So I think from a moral responsibility, we've got to work with the rest of the industrialized world to address the problems of international poverty, but you don't do that by making people in this country even poorer. So those are steps forward. I'll tell you what my concern is the provisions dealing with the guest worker programs. Real unemployment in America, counting those people who have given up looking for work and are working part-time when they want to work full-time, you know what it is? Close to 14%. Now, if you have, and it's higher for young people, it is higher for people of color. You have in this bill guest worker programs that will bring in hundreds of thousands of entry-level workers. Television, you hear these guys talking about all the PhDs are coming into this country. Hundreds of thousands of entry-level workers to work in kitchens, waiters, waitresses, lifeguards, ski resort workers. Is it really true that we can't find American workers to do those jobs? Frankly, I don't believe it. So as a nation, I'm very proud that we got a 2-year youth employment program which provided about 400,000 jobs for young Americans. That's very important. But you're right, given the magnitude of the problem, it doesn't go anywhere near far enough. So as a nation, we have got to ask ourselves, do we really need, when you go to ghettos in this country, when you go to inner cities, you have 30, 40% unemployment. Do we really need hundreds of thousands of workers, entry-level workers from around the country coming in competing against these kids? I think not.
And he was right. Labor unions, for example, used to all be anti-immigration. Now they don't seem to really care about labor at all. We can argue the facts on this in another video. This video is already super long, but the proof is in the pudding and that the capitalists smile on people like Vaush. If not Vaush in particular, people with a viewpoint of Vaush. And they really hate people who want to restrict immigration and want to support tariffs and want to support a kind of people's economy. The establishment racists also fancy themselves anti-theists. And maybe some of the rank and file are, but in practice they are promoting the rise of Islam, which is today in practice a far more fundamentalist religion than Christianity. I'm not talking about scripture or what this or that verse says. That's irrelevant, as religionists will pick and choose whatever they want, but the reality is that Islam is more constricting on the rights of women, homosexuals, and even straight men, and it diverts the masses away from their own exploitation in the Arab world in Indonesia, for example, just as it did in Russia in the past. They support institutional racism against the global minority of Europeans, support the dispossession of particularly Europeans, and it is a specific racial target. They have no problems with other forms of outright racial supremacism, something which even the boogeymen alt-right don't support, and they have falsified history in order to justify this hypocrisy. To say white nationalism is something inherently aggressive and evil, but black supremacism is a reaction to being so put upon. And if you try to challenge them on this hypocrisy, to say that this is a bogus attempt at justifying a racist double standard, well then they call you a Nazi historical revisionist. They support the agenda of the Koch brothers. They continue to support Obama after he passed laws forcing poor people to buy insurance, a demented and evil scheme pioneered by Mitt Romney. Like the Nazis and the Soviets, they deny heredity and promote racial revanchism. So what are they? They are ultra-capitalists, promoters of religious fanaticism, enemies of labor and the working class, Nazi-style deniers of heredity and promoters of racial hatred, and institutional racism from the universities to the firm. In a sane world, we would have a very easy word for them: the far right. We would say they are the far right, even down to their personality. The way they argue, the way they think, is by appealing to authorities. They have that authoritarian view of knowledge. What do the experts, what do the people with the credentials in my place and my time in history say? And that's what they believe. I should be able to call people like Vaush the far right. But to avoid confusion, I will use the term establishment racist. He is an establishment racist, an ultra-capitalist, theocratic racist who does the bidding of the establishment. And these people should be treated as such. Their speech should be treated as a form of hate speech, as a form of dangerous speech, and we should seek to remove them from any position of influence until they are de-radicalized. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you wish, you can support me on Subscribestar, or you can support my friend Cool Tapes on Patreon, who posts a cool picture whenever I upload a video on YouTube. Subscribestar is a monthly. I'm never not working on a video, even if there's a big delay. I wanted this video to Vaush to hopefully be one of the first things that comes up when you search his username, so fingers crossed on that. Possible upcoming videos: Black Privilege During Jim Crow, a realistic assessment of slavery in the United States, and Understanding the Establishment Racists.